We want to wish everyone a good day. We want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. Needless to say, after what happened last night, this is a special urgent briefing. And on behalf of all of us at the FIDF family, we want to thank Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan is an incredibly busy point in his life, especially what's happening both vis-a-vis Iran and Israel, Hezbollah and Israel. And yet he made the time. And all of you know, all of you are fans of, you watch Jonathan Schanzer, first of all, on his podcast. Secondly, you know the role that he played for the Treasury Department, and now is the senior fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD, one of the great organizations that ultimately is shaping policy for nations across the globe. Jonathan is with us. Jonathan, we can't thank you enough for making the time for us. And really, no one is talking about this. There's only rumors out there. Can you give us some insight into what happened last night and what's going on?
Yeah, Steve, first of all, great to be with you. And thanks again to you and FIDF for all that you do. The story is this, that, obviously after that April 14th exchange with Iran firing 320 different missiles and drones into Israel. By the way, that was about 60,000 tons of explosives that Iran tried to fire into Israel. It was all basically stopped, and that was the good news, that the system that was created by the United States, the CENTCOM architecture, had worked, and that Israel really barely felt the brunt of any of that. But then the administration came out and said, we don't want you to escalate. And so the Israelis were saying, well, we have to respond, that there's no choice but for Israel to respond, because they needed to reestablish deterrence, that a message needed to be sent to the Iranian regime. So the Israelis, I think, struggled with how to respond while also staying on side with the United States. And as we can now say with certainty, they found their way of staying under the threshold of escalation while still responding. So here's what we know. Last night, somewhere around maybe 10 o'clock in the evening Eastern time, reports started to come in that targets in Iran, Iraq, and Syria were struck right around the same time. But that nothing was really registering on the air defense systems in these countries. In other words, they were not alerted in advance to what was coming, and yet explosions took place anyway. So now people start to ask, what is going on? I've spent the last 12 hours or so or longer trying to figure out exactly what transpired. And what we can say is this, that the Israelis deployed a new weapon, something that has not been seen in the Middle East up until now. It is likely something that is described as a glide bomb, but with a much longer distance. I think most glide bombs are believed to only have a 40-mile trajectory. This went apparently much further, fired somewhere either in Syria or Iraq, completely off the radar of the Iranians. And really what was hit in Iran was really the most important component of this. They took out radar, apparently, on an airbase that is in charge of defending against some of Iran's most sensitive nuclear facilities. And so the Israelis essentially, the message was, we are able to hit you. You are not able to defend against us. And look at what we can hit if we wish to do so. Now, they were able to stay under the threshold of escalation because, from what I understand, the Israelis sent somewhere around 10% of what the Iranians sent to Israel on the 14th. So somewhere between 10 and 30 weapons were deployed. And nobody was hit, nobody was killed. It was just simply a defensive installation that was destroyed. It was on an airbase in the Isfahan area, and the Israelis basically considered the matter closed. I think the Iranians appear to be content not responding. We'll have to wait and see. It still may be that the Iranians do decide to respond. But I do believe they understand that the Israelis showed them something that should make them nervous. It should make them want to stand down, because the last thing they want to do is to see more of their air defenses destroyed, more of these radars destroyed, with their inability to fire back while now being exposed to the IDF. We understand that there were targets struck in other places, Syria and Iraq. Unclear whether they were hit by the same weapons or different ones. But again, I think the big takeaway here was that the Israelis bared their teeth at the Iranians, showed them that, they were basically bring knives to a gunfight, that the Israelis have technology and abilities that the Iranians didn't know and that they don't want to mess with. And I think that was the message delivered, the deterrence established, and now we wait and see whether the Iranians have the will to try to do this again.
So, Jonathan, this is radically different than anything we've seen in the past. Somehow they have some kind of weaponry or some kind of anti-radar system that totally shuts down or makes the Iranian radar dysfunctional, unable to protect themselves. And they, with a very, very limited strike force, whether it was drones, whatever it was, they had 100% accuracy, and they took out whatever they aimed to take out, and they let Iran know, if you want to start up, this is what you're dealing with.
It's exactly
this is
right.
Something that this is. I mean, it's wild. This is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, and look, and this is what happens when you are a country like Iran that doesn't have the kinds of advanced weaponry that Israel has, going up against a technologically advanced enemy, right? And by the way, I mean, it's not like Israel wanted to do this. Israel was backed into a corner, I think, and severely limited by the administration, and maybe limited in part because they didn't want to have another 300 or 500 drones and missiles fired against them again, and to allow for some kind of margin of error. Now, the only thing that I would say here is maybe there are a couple things, there are a couple of downsides that I think we should explore. One is that, first, the Israelis apparently were forced to reveal a new capability that they probably wanted to keep secret, right, for as long as possible. You try to keep these things in your hip pocket and don't flash them if you don't have to. That's number one. Number two is that the Israelis, look, it looks like they have established deterrence again with the Iranian regime, such that they won't see 300 rockets and drones and missiles being fired out of Iran into Israel, which was the goal, right? It was to say, you took things too far on April 14th. We are not going to let you do that again. So that's the good news. The bad news is we may be back to that April 13th scenario, which is simply this, that Iran still has the potential ability to break out on its nuclear program, and they still have all of those proxies that surround Israel. And I don't think that the message was sent here to the Iranians that, hey, if you continue to fire by way of proxy through Hezbollah or through Hamas or through the Houthis, that you're going to get hit with this stuff again. It was really designed to brush them back, to push them back on what happened the other night with that massive attack. So we're back to where we were, which is probably better than the alternative. But Israel, I mean, just to be clear, Israel still has a lot of fighting to do. It's still going to have to win against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It's still going to have to tangle with Hezbollah in the north and Lebanon at some point soon. So in other words, none of the existing challenges before mid-April have been solved, other than the fact that Iran may be chastened from now on.
Yeah, this doesn't help vis-a-vis Hezbollah, because the issue with Hezbollah is not S-300 or S-400 Russian, surface-to-air missiles to take out Israeli jets. It's Hezbollah's. It's their capability, their arsenal of precision-guided missiles. It's the volume, the sheer volume of all the missiles aimed at Israel. This is an Iran deterrence, you're saying.
This is an Iran deterrence moment. I do think it's important, though, when Iran blinks and the Israelis can, make it clear that Iran blinked. I think that is important. Of course, again, we need to wait and see whether Iran decides maybe after a couple of days that, hey, you know what? we're going to trot out a new capability of ours, and let's see if the Israelis can handle it. When it comes to Hezbollah, you're right. It's a volume issue. Although I will say that what happened the other night when the CENTCOM defense architecture was activated, that we saw things that we maybe didn't see before, that the administration was able to activate quickly U.S. air bases and radar and Patriot systems that shot things down. Could Hezbollah rockets also be targeted? Maybe. The other thing we saw, which was fascinating, was that the Brits scrambled their jets out of Larnaca in Cyprus. Right? They actually took part in shooting down some of those drones and missiles fired by the Iranians the other night. That means that whatever is in Cyprus, there are a couple of British bases. Those are actually bases that are they are British sovereign territory, dating back to when the Brits were the colonial power in Cyprus. So they have assets there that could be helpful when Israel does have to tangle with Hezbollah. That was now a capability that was potentially flashed the other night when Iran attacked. So lots of new things coming to light here in the Middle East over just the last week. That attack by Iran was historic in the sense of how much firepower was deployed. And last night was historic in the sense that Israel flashed new weapons that no one had ever seen, and they appear to have won. Again, appear is where we are right now. They appear to have won this showdown. As one Israeli official told me when I was in Israel just 2 days ago, he said, we're playing a game of poker, right? The Iranians didn't know what Israel had. Israel didn't know what the Iranians had, but it was time to show a card here and to, try to force Israel's enemies to stand down and to understand what just transpired. Maybe one last footnote here is, the first attack by Iran, obviously got the attention of Israel's friends in the Gulf, that they were watching and saying, okay, this is something that we probably want to be a part of, this U.S.-led architecture that will shoot down rockets and hostile, weapons that are being fired at us. So maybe it's time for us to get involved here with the U.S.-led alliance. That was great, but then there was another piece of it that was missing, which is, what about the offensive side? Does this alliance have the capability of hurting the Iranians, who are, of course, the enemy of everyone in the region? And I think what the Israelis have probably just done here is to show the Saudis. Certainly, I think the Emiratis are already on board, and the Bahrainis, but maybe even some other countries like the Kuwaitis. They're watching and saying to themselves, okay, the defense worked. Israel's offensive capabilities are now on display. This is some high-tech stuff, and the Iranians, we're watching them potentially back down here. Now, if we could just knock out some of these proxies, the region could be stabilized by the good guys. And I think that is an important lesson for everyone to take away and to reinforce.
Wow. So you're saying what Israel showed and demonstrated, and again, we hear nothing out of Israel. Mum is the word, hush is the word. But if what we assume and if what you're articulating is the case, this gives the Sunni Arab nations at least the confidence that not only is there defensive capabilities, but the greatest evil, the greatest threat to their existence, the heretical Shia Caliphate led by Iran, ultimately can be brought down at not the most expensive price.
Yeah, I think that is the takeaway. Look, there are. I think there are still some challenges that need to be grappled with. I mean, first of all, the fact that these proxies still exist and that some of them are fairly formidable. The Houthis have some of these long-range missiles that need to be dealt with. Hezbollah has the 200,000 missiles and rockets, not to mention precision weapons that need to be dealt with. So the challenge is not over with. The other thing that I'll just say is the Iranians, when they fired those 300 missiles and drones the other night, what they were putting on display was a capability that they have, which, was not, nothing. This was nothing to sneeze at here. They are able to produce some of these weapons quickly and cheaply. And the Israelis, don't do either, right? And nor do the Americans, for that matter. We produce high quality weaponry that will either intercept or attack with deadly precision, but it costs more and it takes longer to produce. And so there is, I think, a disparity between the two sides that also must be reckoned with here. I should also note that the Iranians, when they fired some of those ballistic missiles, those, and you may have seen some of the photos, Steve, like these are missiles that are as long as a bus, right? Massive, long range, huge missiles that can do a lot of damage. Some of them may be capable of carrying nuclear warheads. So the Iranians may have been testing things for future battle. So there's a lot of things going on here where both sides are assessing themselves and they're assessing the other. And the US is watching, the Gulf is watching. It's a big game of three-dimensional chess here. There's a lot that is being learned in real time. But I do think that on average here right now, the Israelis took out a senior IRGC general. Then they shot down 99% of those rockets fired by their fiercest enemy. And then they turned around with deadly precision, showing a capability that they have. In my mind, the Israelis have walked away with a win, not a win that the Biden administration was asking them to take, so to speak, right? They were not standing down. They made sure to get the last word in what is clearly a psychological test of wills, that poker game that we just mentioned. That's what's going on here right now. And we're far from finished, but at least this episode appears to have gone the right way in Israel's favor.
Can we take a step back for a second? And I want to share something with you and ask for your comment on it. What, on the one hand, gives me an incredible sense of gratitude, first of all, to God, to the whole CENT command, and to the IDF, but we should not take it for granted, and nor should we think it's the norm, that only one rocket penetrated, hit Nevatim Air Base out of 350. They were expecting that 10 to 20% would make it through. 10 to 20% is somewhere between 35 and 70 rockets. The hundreds of lives that could have been lost, the incredible assets and the incredible strategic locations that could have been destroyed. And that would have been the norm. I mean, what happened last Saturday night was off the bell curve. We're in a very, very scary situation. And maybe Iran will learn from this. In Iran, the next time we'll send 1,500 in. And if we go back to what should happen, that 10% will make it through, 150% of 1,500 could be devastating to Israel. So, in other words, in no way, shape, or form can we sit and sleep at ease or sleep comfortably at night. If anything, we should not assume that Saturday night was the norm, but really Saturday night was a miraculous exception. Just I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if it was an exception or not, because you had CENTCOM activated and the Patriots. You had the Jordanians activated, and they shot down a handful of these. The Saudis apparently shot down 2, despite some of their denials. The Brits shot down a number of them. As I understand it, the Israelis shot down 75%, and everyone else shot down an additional 25%. So it was Israel's 3-layered missile defense system. So it's Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow 2 and 3. They did the bulk of the work, and then others chipped in. Whether that's something that can be replicated, I don't know. I think, and I don't really want to find out, by the way. I mean, I think, that's the last thing that you want to see. And I think that's why the Israelis, they were trying to do everything they could to respond, to make sure that they established deterrence and let the Iranians know they weren't afraid of them, but they stayed, at least from what we could tell, under the threshold of escalation, right? That was what they didn't want. They didn't want to invite another 300 or 500 or 1,500. But now let me say this. The capabilities of the Iranians to engage in a saturation bombing of Israel still very much there, right? Because you don't need to do it only from Iran. You can do it from Yemen. and from Lebanon and from Iraq and Syria, where there are several dozen, Shiite militias that can be activated. Now, they don't all have the same capabilities and they all don't have the same large number. But just take Lebanon, for example, couple that, where Hezbollah is, couple that with, some rockets being fired from other places, it could be overwhelming. And that's the thing that I think the Israelis need to be careful of. The strategy that Iran has, what we call the ring of fire, that ability to place these proxies close to Israel's borders and to be able to shoot from short range, that is still very much a problem. The other thing is this. We talked about the disparity in terms of the quality of what Israel produces versus what the Iranians produce. There's the cost of a night like Saturday night, Sunday morning. My understanding, and this is back of the envelope, and it's only my math, that night probably cost Israel and its allies $400 million. $400 million for a night of defense. Now, look, you can't put a cost on saving the lives of the people of Israel and safeguarding the infrastructure, but how many times can you do that? So, in my view, so that's an economic war that's going on alongside the kinetic war. So the Israelis, I think, at this point, have to be asking themselves, okay, if we can prevent attacks from taking place, prevent the damage, and we've got the pinpoint accuracy to be able to take out top generals, and we've got the pinpoint accuracy to take out, air defenses or radar, Russian-made equipment, by the way, which I'm sure the Russians can't be too pleased about. But then the question becomes, what's the Israeli strategy? Is the strategy to just keep playing defense and fending off these attacks? Or is Israel going to go on the offense? Which I think at this point, it's glaringly apparent that the Israelis need some kind of strategy that really forces the Iranians to halt this and to begin to call back their proxies, because this is unsustainable. Not from a financial perspective, from a psychological perspective, the people of Israel. I mean, look, having just been there, I will say it was remarkable to see the resilience of the people of Israel. Everybody was just sort of shrugging off Saturday night and just, not very stressed out about what might come next. The flight that I was in Cyprus before going to Israel. The flight from Cyprus to Israel was packed with Israelis looking to get home before Passover. And when the flight landed, everybody's clapping the way they always do. You get that fierce sense of pride. But how long can this go on for? It is starting to wear on the people of Israel. And so they need, in my view, a strategy not just for fending off, but for truly countering and perhaps, weakening or even defeating the Islamic Republic and their designs against Israel.
Yeah, look, with all of the miracles and all of the resounding, think about the years of Juniper Falcon and Juniper Cobra, the JC and the JF joint activities between American, Israeli, and between other parties in the Central Command. And they've been practicing this for years, and it worked Saturday night. But with all of that said, like your point is, you can't rely on miracles, and you can't rely on this to be the norm.
And you can't win games only playing defense. And that, I think, really is, when the administration tells Israel take the win for having, not absorbed those 300 missiles and drones, it's not a win. It's not a look. It absolutely convinced the Gulf states that this was a club that's worth being in, but the enemy's still there, and the enemy's proxies are still there, and the enemy's capabilities are still there, and the enemy's nuclear program is still potentially on the precipice. That means that Israel still has its work cut out for it. Now, I don't want to say that Israel doesn't have a strategy. I haven't heard it, and maybe I'm not supposed to, because if the IDF tells me that this is their strategy, well, then it's not a secret any longer, and maybe there is something. But I have yet to hear someone articulate what the Israelis are going to do to go on the offensive and to finally convince the regime in Iran that it is not worth the fight. that they will lose more than they try to gain here by continuing this battle by proxy. And now they've come out of the shadows. And by the way, Steve, the Iranians, after 45 years of fighting behind their proxies, fighting Israel to the last Palestinian, fighting Israel to the last Lebanese, they just came out of the shadows. They made it clear that they are the ones who are behind all of this, that they're the ones who are fighting, that it's not a Palestinian versus Israeli thing. And I'll just tell you a quick story. This is, I want to say, I think we are at an incredibly important moment. There was a psychological pivot that took place. I was in my trip before getting to Israel. I was in Greece and then in Cyprus. And then I spent the last couple of days in Israel before coming home yesterday morning. I was in Greece and I was talking to a Greek diplomat, and I was getting an earful about how Israel was fighting its war in Gaza and how the pictures were just horrible, and it was being described as collective punishment, and that Israel was losing the support of the international community. And then this diplomat gets a phone call, and it's NATO on the other line. And NATO is explaining that a war by Iran has just been launched, and that there's, hundreds of missiles and drones on the way to Israel, and that impact will be in 3 to 4 hours. And the diplomat gets off the phone and says, everything that I just told you about Gaza, no need. Don't convey that. I have one message for the Israelis, that Greece stands with Israel. And I think what's important here to understand is that maybe, just maybe, there is a clarity now about what is going on in the region. And so not only does Israel need to be thinking about defense and offense in terms of kinetics and the military strategy, but I also think that there may be a pivot that can and should be explained here any way that we can, that this is now a full-blown war between Israel and Iran. Let's call it the 10-7 war. Whatever we want to call this, it is not the war between Israel and Hamas. This is, as they say in Hebrew, kesef katan, right? Small change. The big war has now just announced itself. And the question is, how is it going to end? How is it going to be fought? These are the questions that I have right now, because again, whatever happened, you can actually hear Biden, David Cameron from the UK. They really want Israel to go back and finish the war in Gaza now. After months of berating the Israelis, they're saying, hey, go fight and finish the war, because you know what? Don't fight Iran. They're afraid of Israel fighting Iran because it's a bigger war that they don't want to have to deal with. So you get a sense that, giving Israel the green light in Gaza right now is the concession that they want to provide so that Israel doesn't fight the war that everyone knew was coming. This is the framing that people now need to understand. A whole new world, a whole new reality.
Jonathan, for making the time for us, those of us who are incredibly grateful to you, fans of yours, fans of FDD, we can't thank you enough. We want to wish you and your family a Shabbat Shalom. You and your family a wonderful Pesach, a meaningful Pesach. And look, we have a lot of prayers right now. It's a very precarious, it's a very fragile situation between Hezbollah, Iran, and everything else. And please God that the people of Israel, who really are on the front line of humanity, on the front line of Western civilization, they'll be protected, and they'll be able to protect themselves and put an end to the evil of the Shia Caliphate, the head of the octopus with its many tentacles. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.